The foreign hand has been a recurring theme in India's politics for several decades. But recently, Prime Minister Modi said that foreign powers were making an attempt to interfere in India's elections. And the Russian spokesperson said yesterday that the United States is interfering in India's elections as well. Now, the US has just denied that statement. But there's an interesting 2016 study by Professor Dov Levin at the Carnegie Mellon University. Professor Levin studied 938 elections from 1946 to 2000. Part of the study, he found that both the United States and the Soviet Union and later Russia intervened in 117 of those 938 elections. The US intervened in 81 foreign elections, while the Soviet Union or Russia intervened in 36 foreign elections. That's about 1 in 9 elections. Majority of those interventions were through covert rather than overt actions. So clearly there's a precedent in the fact that great powers have intervened in elections, but are they still doing so in the light of all the new allegations that we've been hearing? Joining me to discuss this are Pramit Chaudhary, Bhanuchandar Nagarajan, my colleague Aditya Raj Kaul in the studio at News9 Plus. Gentlemen, welcome to the News9 Plus Show. Pramit, I want to start by asking you this. Prime Minister Modi brought up this very tried and tested old meme that we used to hear in the 70s and 80s, the foreign hand. Do you believe there's enough evidence to suggest that there are foreign forces that play to influence the Indian elections by whatever means? There's a toolkit debate that was we heard a couple of years back.
Traditionally in the past, I mean, the figures you cited, for example, are largely Cold War
Yes.
reference to Soviet and American intervention during the Cold War. That type of intervention, those type of interventions were
Yes.
often driven by simply money,
Right.
blackmail, in some cases even running or supporting a specific political party.
Right.
And occasionally sort of public statements by a government in favor of someone
Yes.
else. Today, that probably will not work
Right.
very effectively. One, people are a bit too sensitive about these things.
Right.
Second, so you're normally now reduced to really either social media,
Yes.
online interventions in favor of a certain government. There's some evidence of finance is still useful, especially
Right.
for smaller countries. And occasionally, yes, policy statements or endorsements. So those are the least effective because most people don't really care what other governments may tell them to do. In the case of India, of course, we have electronic voting machines. And I
Right.
know we, Election Commission and the Indian security structure have in the past and continue to cross-check whether it is possible to hack EVMs
Right.
and affect elections that way. And so far, there's been zero evidence that is feasible. So Prime Minister Modi has raised this, and there are definitely some foreign governments that would not like him to come to power or
Right.
would like to intervene in this election. My overall sense would be the United States is not one of them. They have a very good relationship with Prime Minister Modi and have been generally happy
Right.
with the direction of his policy. I know when I have spoken with U.S. officials in Washington, they believe
Yes.
that he is easily one of the closest friends they've ever faced sitting and ruling from Delhi. But Pakistan, potentially China,
Yes.
would be among the two countries that would immediately come to mind that would probably prefer Modi not to come to power.
Right.
I have met Indian intelligence officers who've worked on China who said the Chinese are not all that happy, largely because they see Modi's economic successes as something that would be, in the long run,
Right.
something that China would prefer not to see take place. Is that enough for them to intervene? My view would be no, not yet. But if there can be subtle ways, either, for
Right.
example, online or finance,
Yes.
that would be feasible. The main reason why governments try not to do this directly
Right.
for fear of being caught,
Right.
that the consequences of being caught would be almost at least 10 times more greater than the benefits. The costs would be 10 times more than the benefits of doing so, and would probably result in whoever they're trying to undermine winning the election,
Right.
rather than losing them.
Right, absolutely. And Aditya, when was the last time that you saw the US, Russia being pulled into a largely, Indian election debate where the Russians made that sensational allegation just yesterday saying that the US was interfering in Indian elections. What's your take on this?
Well, the Russian Foreign Ministry is an unlikely, person or a entity to come out with this particular statement. I heard Maria, the spokesperson of the Russian Foreign Ministry, day before yesterday, who said that US was trying to interfere in internal affairs of India.
Right.
Now, there are two aspects here. One is the kind of interference or the influence that is happening, be it from US, Europe, or any other part of the world, perhaps China and Pakistan more so.
Yes.
And second is the kind of impact it has had.
Right.
Is the influence, is the interference really having an impact really? My inference or my understanding really is that there have been attempts.
Right.
There have been attempts not during the elections particularly, but through the term last 10 years of Modi 1 and Modi 2, in which there have been attempts to influence a particular segment, a particular community, a particular area where a sentiment has been hurt or provoked to challenge Modi's government and the BJP in particular. There are several instances. You have heard the scandal of Cambridge Analytica that happened. That was one of the biggest scandals that happened, not only in India, but perhaps there were other countries that were embroiled in it. Apart from that, you also have, of course, very recently, when the CAA protests happened, a lot of NGOs came into the surface, and the Modi government, particularly the Ministry of Home Affairs, acted hard against them. There were instances where these NGOs were trying to provoke, fund, not just the CAA protest, but also the farmers' protest that happened on the borders of Delhi.
In 2019.
Millions and millions of dollars really coming in. There was, as you rightly pointed out, a toolkit scandal also happening, perhaps, some of the global activists involved in it. So I wouldn't necessarily say that there hasn't been a foreign hand. But there have been attempts to strong-arm India. The latest and the biggest example is the Hardeep Singh Nijjar matter that is underway. And there is the foreign press, the Guardian, New York Times and others. It almost feels like printing handouts from the CIA or the Five Eyes intelligence. Whether this will benefit Modi or go against him is for anybody to judge. But certainly there have been attempts at foreign interference. More so by Pakistan and China, certainly. But certainly to strong-arm India, the rising India, an India that cannot certainly be ignored in this new international order, perhaps yes.
China and Pakistan, the obvious countries that wouldn't want Prime Minister Modi to return to power, as Pramit also mentioned, Aditya. But Bhanuchandar, what's your sense on the foreign hand making a return to Indian political discourse, becoming a global buzzword now with Russians and the Americans now jumping in point and counterpoint? What's your take on this? Are foreign countries actually involved, as Aditya mentions, Five Eyes countries? Probably one we know for sure wouldn't want Prime Minister Modi to come back. But what's your take on the other four?
You see, international relations operates in a jungle, right? Every student of the subject is taught that there are actors in a nation state that act in immoral ways and get away with. There will be election interferences, and they will brazenly deny the fact that they are interfering as well. And interference happens through multiple ways, like Aditya was saying, through non-profits, especially during the CAA protest, what we saw, through media arms. The Guardian actually endorsed Rahul Gandhi, and Washington Post did a job with the Panoon and the Nijjar affairs. And if you remember, in 2019, The Economist endorsed Rahul Gandhi as well. But what has hurt the most, the relations the most, is the fact that USCIRF, which is a federal agency talking about religious freedom in India, that is unacceptable. That is where I think somebody should draw the line. I think our foreign policy mandarins have handled it very well. There are cool hits that are prevailing. But Sandeep, we should expect this more. We are becoming a superpower. We are going to be the third largest economy soon. Nobody is going to roll out the red carpet for us. We should actually develop our own counter instruments in terms of social media security, our own social media impact, and other instruments. In fact, we should have a media behemoth like a BBC or France 24, so on. Maybe News9 could become one of that as well, I guess.
We'll have to look at that. But Pramit, this point that Bhanuchandar mentioned, the fact that there's a certain, debate in the Western world, especially about, India's rise, kind of government of India policies. Do you see this as part of a conspiracy, or is it just the fact that we need to grow a thicker skin to handle this kind of criticism, especially given the fact that we're going to be the third largest economy in the world in a couple of years' time?
So a couple of points you made here. First, you have to differentiate between what is sponsored by governments and what is sponsored by, if you wish, non-state players. And in this case, the non-state players are often NGOs and foundations.
Right.
What's interesting in the modern world is that foundations, some of them anyway, are almost as powerful as small governments or medium-sized governments are in terms of resources they bring to play. A Gates Foundation, a Soros Foundation. Some of these now have $50 to $100 billion to play around with. And they will push the agendas of the people who give the money, who are providing the money.
Right.
So, for example, and then media, of course, is a complex game of people who agencies and of that are independent, that work with government, and do whatever they feel like. So the Guardian is a left newspaper, so it will automatically be violently critical of Modi, whatever it may think of India. But it can hardly be considered an arm or close to the British government because they hate Rishi Sunak even more than they hate Modi, and are wildly critical of Sunak and desperately hoping that he'll lose the next election. So these are these non-state players, or the things are a more complex way of reading it. And one of the results, I think, of the fragmentation of both media, the rise of giant foundations with money that are comparable to like giant corporations, for example, makes it harder to distinguish who exactly is behind what. But I think broadly, yes, Modi is seen, let's put it this way, there is a large cluster of left liberal institutions in the West, the coastal elites of America, if you wish, and urban elites in parts of Europe, who have conflated Modi's rise and his policies with the right-wing leaders they do not like at home, whether it's Trump or Sunak and so on and so forth, even though in many ways they're very different. These different people and the agencies involved are not at all the same, and so therefore attack Modi on the basis that he's part of the same thing that Trump is. So when I've asked, in fact, when I've argued with people from these organizations and so on, I said, look, Modi is one of the strongest supporters of green transition and green energy in the world. He has passed a transgender rights bill. He has supported decriminalization of homosexuality in this country. So then you come in and say he's like Trump. He's not at all like Trump. He's increased abortion rights in this country. So how does he fit in with your right-wing thing? And they often don't even know. They're like, oh, we had no idea. Because they have biased themselves. They've made them
straight-jacketed in their thinking.
Exactly like a right-wing Republican of a certain variety.
Right, a cookie-cutter definition of a right-wing Republican thing. But, Aditya, interesting points made there by Pramit, the fact that there are actually large foundations out there that are actually funding groups, protests, NGOs, and that possibly also explains the reason why the Modi government has cracked down on NGOs, especially NGO funding. But that's a separate debate for another day. But what's your point on this, the fact that what Pramit mentioned, NGOs, foundations becoming as powerful as governments. How do you identify when a government is behind a certain act, or whether it's an NGO or a foundation?
No, I quite agree with him, and I absolutely concur when he says that there is a certain leftist lobby, particularly in the media, the intelligentsia, and of course in many cases there is the deep state that acts, and of course we'll have to be vigilant in both ways. And in many of these protests, particularly the Sikh separatist protests and the CAA, we have had several NGOs, and that's why the toolkit really came in. But of course, I think the Foreign Ministry and of course India's deep state would be able to easily identify the kind of people who are involved and where the deep state is certainly acting in a certain way to strong arm India. As I said, the current phase, particularly immediately after the G20 success that India had last year, We've had the Khalistani issue really rising, even though there isn't much Khalistani presence or resonance in the Indian state of Punjab in the last 3 decades. So this is a way to strong arm and perhaps provoke a new kind of a violence in India, and perhaps make India and the Indian government believe in certain kinds of foreign notions where they do not want to see India's rise, particularly economically, apart from a certain level.
Right, absolutely. Interesting points. Thank you very much, Aditya, Pramit Pal Chaudhary, Bhanuchandar, for joining us this evening on this debate on the foreign hand in India's 2024 elections. A very unlikely bunch of statements coming out there from the Russian spokesperson, and of course denied by the US, and of course Prime Minister Modi alleging that there's a foreign hand at play in India's elections.